evening, everyone. I don't know how good of an evening it might actually be with some of the things that we're going to share tonight. Those of you that don't know me, my name is Denise Keele, and I'm the Executive Director of the Michigan Climate Action Network. We have got a wonderful program for you this evening, and lots of good things to share. As we go through the evening, please put questions and comments in the chat. I'm not sure we'll have time with these amazing speakers and all they have to share to get to them. If we do have a little time, we absolutely will, but our plan is to follow up with everyone after the event. So if you do have questions, please throw them in the chat or send them along, and we will follow up with those pieces. And as you just heard, we are recording the event, so you're going to be able to view it again and share it out and do all those pieces. And so we are, hopefully, a lot of you are familiar with the Michigan Climate Action Network. We are the first and largest climate-focused organization in the state, and our mission is to empower fierce advocates to take the bold and equitable actions that we need to address the urgency of the climate crisis. We do that by amplifying, connecting, and supporting a network of over 150 groups and 40,000 individuals. We take a positive and solutions-oriented approach because the good news is that the majority of Michiganders support climate action, and the renewable energy transition to a just and resilient future is underway. Unfortunately, we are up against a Goliath not interested in climate justice. The fossil fuel industry is using their massive influence to manipulate the levers of power and keep us reliant on dirty and expensive oil and gas, all for the sake of profit over people. So we are also taking some time to call out those false solutions that are advanced by the industry that sometimes seem like they might address environmental impacts, but in fact are continuing to harm communities and exacerbate the climate crisis. The focus of our 2025 Community Voices series will be to highlight the difference between those harmful, false approaches and the just solutions that we all know are already out there, promoting fairness and real progress. We could think of no better issue to start with than the fight against Canadian fossil fuel giant Enbridge Energy and the fight to shut down Line 5. I know you've seen a lot of these maps before, and we all live with the knowledge that it's not if, but when there will be a catastrophic oil pipeline rupture in the Great Lakes. In its long history of reckless operation, Enbridge is responsible for the largest land-based oil spill in 2010, continuing to impact my community of Kalamazoo, and Enbridge has allowed the Line 5 to spill at least 33 times since 1953, releasing more than 1 million gallons of oil into the environment. And not only does that spill create an enormous threat to the Great Lakes, but we're already every day experiencing a carbon spill into the atmosphere. Enbridge Line 5 pipeline transports 23 million gallons of crude oil that create more than 57 million metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions each year. As many of you know, here in Michigan, our policymakers have already determined that shutting down Line 5 is the best option. In 2019, after significant damage to an anchor support was revealed, Attorney General Dana Nessel filed for a preliminary injunction, and after 6 years of Enbridge's procedural maneuvering, that case is now back in state court. In 2020, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer ordered Enbridge to stop operating the Line 5 in the Straits. She revoked and terminated its easement due to the threat of contamination of the source of drinking water for more than 40 million people. Yet Enbridge is still operating Line 5 in violation of the governor's order. In the midst of all this, rather than planning a shutdown, or as they are in Wisconsin, a reroute, or any other alternatives, Enbridge is instead seeking permits to build an underground oil tunnel below the Great Lakes that would extend the life of Line 5 and its dangers into the next century. Enbridge's false solution of this oil tunnel is why we are all here tonight. The project does need approval from the Michigan Public Service Commission, the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, and the United States Army Corps of Engineers. If I'm not my usual upbeat self, it's because a couple big things have happened this week and today. Just this week, we learned that the proposed Line 5 tunnel is included as a project that may be expedited under a recent energy emergency executive order by President Trump, which would potentially derail a full environmental review by the United States Army Corps of Engineers. Don't worry, we're going to have an action that you can take before that decision happens by tomorrow. And I have a little bit more bad news. As many of you know, we have been appealing the Michigan Public Service Commission's flawed decision to approve the Line 5 tunnel. Our consolidated appeals with For Love of Water, Bay Mills Indian Community, and many others sought to reverse the Commission's flawed decision to approve that permit for Enbridge to build its tunnel. And after 3 years of litigation, just this afternoon, we learned that unfortunately the Michigan Court of Appeals declined to reverse and remand the permit approval for Line 5 tunnel. So where does this leave us? Don't worry, we're not giving up this fight by any means. I don't know exactly what the next steps are right now. We've got some actions for you to still take tonight and at the end of this event. And moreover, we believe that when the evidence of the increased risks and the environmental, cultural, and economic impacts of building the tunnel are properly considered, that this project cannot possibly go forward. Even if the commission and the courts may never hear the evidence that you're going to hear tonight, it's even more important for us to share it with you and the public so that we can continue to resist with the real information this entirely false solution. We're going to hear from two amazing speakers tonight that are going to be focused on helping us all understand those risks so that we are better prepared as fierce advocates to stand up for people over profits. Andrea Pierce is going to speak on Indigenous concerns as a water protector perspectives and the impact of the tunnel project on communities who rely on the Straits area. But first up, someone who I always say is even scarier than I am in their remarks on this issue, is Brian O'Mara, a nationally recognized geological and technical tunnel expert with over 30 years of experience in consulting and construction management support. He has worked thousands of hours underground as a resident inspector and staff engineer for deep tunnel and shaft projects in the Great Lakes region and testified as an expert witness in the Enbridge Line 5 tunnel cases. He highlights key technical safety and engineering concerns related to the proposed tunnel. And Brian, I'm going to let you take it away here. And you might first unmute and you should be able to share your screen.
Sorry. Thank you for the introduction. Pull my presentation here. From the beginning. Okay. I'd like to start my presentation highlighting a few of these images on my cover slide. And these actually get right to the heart of my main concern is a catastrophic failure of the Line 5 tunnel. And we've got some experience with this in Michigan and in the Great Lakes. And we frankly have global experience with similar types of disasters as well. And I just do not want to have a repeat of history here. The image in the lower left corner here was taken in a tunnel fire that occurred in the Italian and French Alps. This was a relatively small fire from one truck that was carrying margarine and flour that caught fire in a tunnel that had inadequate fire suppression, fire detection, and ventilation. It caused extreme damage to the tunnel liner. It brought the tunnel liner concrete lining down. There was a complete failure. Now, this was up in a mountain. If this had happened in the Great Lakes beneath hundreds of feet of saturated soil and sediment, the water and rock and soil would have come rushing in through that hole that you can see in the ceiling of the tunnel here. So that is something that could certainly happen. We've got some other more local examples, and if you look at the images in the upper right-hand corner, this is in regards to the Lake Huron water tunnel disaster. Some of you may be familiar with. It was a deep tunnel, is a deep tunnel that extends 4 miles out from Fort Gratiot near Port Huron underneath Lake Huron. The tunnel was nearly completed in construction when a drill bit struck a spark that ignited a pocket of methane gas. The methane had come up into the tunnel from the underlying Antrim shale, and 22 of the workers in the tunnel were killed in this accident. What you're looking at here is the cofferdam structure that was damaged at the surface, even though the explosion occurred 4 miles away from this area. You can see the damage that was done, and it was significant. There was this received national coverage at the time, but it's been over 50 years. I'm afraid a lot of our politicians and our regulators and frankly, even the labor unions may have forgotten about this incident. It's one of the worst industrial accidents in the state of Michigan. And there's a memorial to the folks that did pass away in this incident in Fort Gratiot. So I just wanted to start the presentation off with this acknowledgement that things could go horribly bad. And this is what I'm trying to avoid. I'm not anti-tunnel. I spent the last 5 decades working on tunnel projects around the United States. Here's just a brief summary of my qualifications. I'm not going to go through them all, but as Denise mentioned, I did serve as an expert witness in the MPSC matter regarding Line 5. I was specifically asked to review a couple of questions that became before the commission. Will the tunnel survive, or is it vulnerable to damage from a catastrophic failure from explosion or fire? The answer is yes, it is very vulnerable. It doesn't take much of a fire to cause concrete to fail, and the concrete on this tunnel has reinforcing steel, and that will melt, and the total integrity of the tunnel can be compromised and can virtually fail within minutes, depending on the strength of the fire. And that is certainly something that could happen in this Enbridge Line 5 tunnel. The other question I was asked to testify on was, will the sediments and the rocks surrounding the tunnel serve as a secondary containment to keep the oil and gas liquids from migrating into the straits? The answer to that question was also no. The Enbridge tunnel will be operating at over 500 PSI pressure. The overburden pressure of the tunnel, and that's basically the weight of the rocks and the sediment and the water above the tunnel, is only about 250 PSI at maximum. So if there is a failure of the tunnel due to a fire or an explosion, the pipeline will still be pumping out oil and gas at a pressure that's twice as high as the overburden pressure. So that material from the product from the pipeline will continue to exit the pipeline, and it'll cut its way through rock, it'll cut its way through the sediment, and it'll make its way into the water column. And as we know in the past, Enbridge has had a difficult time recognizing when they're having a massive leak. The Kalamazoo River release, it took them 17 hours before they realized they had a problem. So this pipeline pumps out 15,000 gallons a minute of oil and gas liquids. So you can imagine how much could be released over just a few minutes. We're talking at least 50,000 gallons of oil. So that is my real concern. And I will be highlighting other issues that I've identified over the last several years, looking at all the Enbridge documents. I spent hundreds of hours reviewing their designs, their geotechnical reports. And the more I've looked at this project, the more I am concerned, and that remains so today. All right, tunneling beneath open water. It might sound easy, but it's actually a big deal. People have been trying to do it for hundreds of years, and much of the time they've been failing to do it. It's the most complicated, dangerous, and technically challenging type of construction that we can do on planet Earth. So this is not insignificant. Enbridge has no tunnel construction experience. They are a pipeline contractor. They essentially dig a ditch and lay their pipe in it, and they bury it. So they have no expertise. They have no real knowledge of what they're doing. They've hired some experts that have tried to help them. And even those, if you look in their past publications and documents, share some of the same concerns that I have raised. And the real challenge of this is that there has not been a tunnel completed under the proposed conditions of this Line 5 tunnel anywhere in the US or anywhere else, frankly. Nothing that is this deep, that is under this much pressure, that is facing the challenging geology. There's methane gas that has been discovered, and they're really taking a risk to complete this project. And I have serious concerns as to whether they can do it safely and even complete the project. Another thing I think I want to make quite clear is that this is very unusual to put an oil and gas transmission pipeline in a tunnel. It's almost never been done anywhere on the planet. And there's a reason for that. Most of you probably have experience going through a road tunnel or maybe a train tunnel, and you will see signs that say hazardous materials are prohibited from going through the tunnel. For us here in Detroit, where I'm at, you see that when you're going through the Windsor Tunnel. And the reason is because tunnels are confined spaces. They are subject to accumulating gases, and those gases can ignite and create fires and explosions and have catastrophic results. So the fact that anyone's even proposing to do this is pretty outrageous. And the federal pipeline regulatory agency also doesn't have experience with this because it's not been done before. Okay. My biggest concern about this whole project lies in the fact that the state of Michigan commissioned a study back in 2017 looking at the various alternatives for Line 5. And the alternative that was recommended was to place a tunnel under the straits and put a pipeline in the tunnel. But that alternative recommendation was qualified with several conditions that had to be met, or should have been met, I should say. The first one was that adequate pre-designed studies would have to be completed prior to construction. Well, that hasn't been done. The second was that the tunnel would be constructed completely within competent bedrock, which means solid rock that is not heavily fractured. There was also not to be any toxic gases or flammable gases, and that's what methane is, and Enbridge found methane. They said there couldn't be extraordinary groundwater infiltration or pressures. These were expected to be minimal. Well, they found just the opposite. They expect high groundwater infiltration with extremely high pressures. And the last thing was that the tunnel annulus, which is the interior space of the tunnel between the pipeline and the walls of the tunnel, basically all this air here, that would be backfilled with grout or concrete to essentially make the tunnel solid, and that would prevent it from being vulnerable to fires, flood, freezing, terrorist attacks, all the threats that I've been raising that could happen in the Enbridge design would be largely eliminated if they just followed that. The last element was driving the tunnel uphill rather than the Enbridge design, which is essentially a deep V. That's dangerous for the workers because they could be trapped on the downhill drive, or as if they're on the uphill leg as they're going north, they could be trapped and cut off and no way to be rescued. So it's just a bad design from someone who's worked in these tunnels for hundreds of hours. That's the last thing you want to be doing, is trapped in a tunnel where there's no exit. All right. We touched on a lot of these in the last slide. So we talked about all the ways that the current design doesn't meet the conditions that were laid out in the state of Michigan recommendation. I don't know how Eagle and the Corps of Engineers and the MPSC and the FSMA and the Michigan Straits Corridor Authority, everyone seems to have overlooked this very important issue, is that what Enbridge is proposing doesn't come close to complying with what was recommended in that report. Everybody's sort of forgotten about that, maybe because it happened in 2017, but these are real issues and they have to be addressed. And if they're not, I'm afraid you're going to be in a situation where you could have a catastrophic failure. Over here in this corner, I actually took an excerpt from the report that was done in 2017, and it talks about why it's important to seal the tunnel. It's to maintain long-term tunnel stability, eliminate inflows, and minimize other threats to the pipeline. And those other threats are fire, floods, and explosions, which the Enbridge design does not address. We talked a little bit about this also. It's an unprecedented engineering challenge. This hasn't been done before. I don't trust Enbridge to get it right. It's going to be a challenge for anyone. And I have concerns about the contractor that's been selected. I have concerns about the limited design that's been done, the pre-designed studies. We talked about the open annulus of the tunnel, which exposes the pipeline to all of these various threats. The dissolved methane, which Enbridge found in their own studies, is in the groundwater beneath the straits. That groundwater will continue to seep into the tunnel as long as the tunnel is there. And when the groundwater seeps in, if the dissolved methane is in it, the methane comes into the atmosphere of the tunnel, and that can create an explosive condition, which could trigger a fire and or a explosion, which could destroy the pipeline, destroy the tunnel. Another concern I have is if they can actually get the tunnel constructed, they have to basically push the pipeline down through the tunnel and up the other end over 4 miles. That's going to put tremendous stress on the steel pipeline and every one of the fittings and the joints. And that could cause a failure sometime in the future as the pipeline is operated. A big concern that I identified, which seems, again, not gotten the attention of any of the regulators, is there is no real adequate ventilation system of the tunnel. There is no fire suppression system in the tunnel. And that is deeply concerning. The Enbridge answer to that, my concern was, well, we're going to seal off both ends of the tunnel, and if there's a fire, it'll burn itself out. I couldn't believe they actually proposed that as their method of controlling the fire, but that's frankly ridiculous. So the tunnels, they did specify that the concrete would withstand a 60-minute fire. Now, if there is any type of release out of this pipeline, it's going to produce a pool of liquid that will burn far longer than 60 minutes. And if there's no fire suppression system in the tunnel, that fire will heat the concrete to create the failure that I've been talking about, where the structure will come down, the pipeline will be destroyed, and it'll still be under high pressure, and the contents of the pipeline will reach its way through the liner out into the rock and soil and ultimately the water column of the above the straits. All right, I'm going to skip this because we talked about that as well. Just to wrap up here, these deadly and catastrophic tunnel fires and methane explosions are not uncommon. If any of you have been to Europe and have taken the tunnel, the train from London to France, the Euro tunnel or the Channel it used to be called, this is a picture of that after a fire that occurred in the tunnel. This was a while ago. Nobody died in this fire, but there was extreme damage, as you can see. And the big change that came about after this fire was they decided to put an automated fire suppression system in throughout the tunnel. That's a good idea, and that's one that Enbridge has not incorporated into their design. We talked about the fact that the open annulus leaves the pipeline exposed to all the threats of fire and freezing and explosion, and that's the biggest fatal flaw with the proposed design. Here's the last slide, essentially capturing the main points of my concerns. The design does not come close to meeting the conditions that were specified in the 2017 alternatives analysis. In fact, every one of the conditional assumptions and criteria were not met, and essentially this proposed design is not safe for the workers. It's not fit for purpose. It is asking for trouble by not addressing the concerns that have been identified by Enbridge in their pre-design studies. The tunnel workers face death or injury from floods, fires, and explosions and collapse, both during construction and after the tunnel is completed, if it can be completed, during the pipeline operations. They want to keep that tunnel open. There'll be workers going in and out of there. And that's, again, a recipe for disaster. The main concern I have is a catastrophic release of oil and gas from the tunnel into the environment. And that's the reason they wanted to put the pipeline in the tunnel. But because of the way they're proposing to do it, they could actually end up with a even bigger problem than the current existing pipelines, believe it or not. And lastly, the real concern I have is that the stakeholders and the regulators, I listed them out here. I want to call them out. EGLE, the MPSC, the Michigan Straits Corridor Authority, FSMA, they're the federal pipeline safety people, the Army Corps of Engineers, the labor unions, everyone's worried about the jobs, the local politicians, the state and federal politicians, and especially Enbridge. None of them have completed an extensive or adequate evaluation of all these risks and the consequences that go into this tunnel. And that's a standard engineering practice. How it has been overlooked, and they're this many years down the line, and it sounds like this thing may be expedited for construction, is a deep concern of mine. And we're going to have to try to get their attention of perhaps the Corps of Engineers. I'm not sure what the next step is, but these risks are real. They haven't gone away, and hopefully we'll get somebody to take them seriously. And that concludes my presentation.
I warned you, scarier than me.
I'm sorry to be such a downer, but this
It's
is real. I've seen it, and early on in my career in Milwaukee, over 30 years ago, we had a tunnel where 3 people were killed, and it scared me straight, and I've been taking it seriously ever since. And I just can see that this could happen again, and I want to do everything I can to prevent it. So.
We so appreciate you coming out tonight. I know we call on you to make these remarks so often, and I'll share one of the pieces when we were in court over the Michigan Public Service Commission's piece just about a month ago now. One of the pieces that the Enbridge lawyers kept insisting was, but everyone agrees that the tunnel is safer than the existing dual pipelines. And I heard the entire courtroom go, right, because we know that that's not true. And again, we're here tonight so that you could share that kind of evidence with the advocacy community that will take it and do whatever
Right,
they can with those
right.
pieces.
Well, I just want to point out one thing, that assumption and conclusion by Enbridge is an example of circular logic, because they're going back to the 2017 report that reached a similar conclusion, but that conclusion was based on the tunnel being filled with concrete. Okay, which is, it's hard to have an explosion in a tunnel if it's filled with concrete because there's no air for the explosion. And Enbridge, they don't recognize it. The regulators don't recognize it. And why they haven't incorporated it into design, it will add millions of dollars to the cost. I suspect that's why it is. But that's a key provision that is lost on just about everybody who's looked at this. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you again so much. And so, beyond the technical and engineering and safety and worker rights risks, as if that wasn't enough, our second speaker this evening is going to help us understand the cultural risks and how the folks, and really all Michiganders, are affected, but in particular, those that rely on the straits. And with us tonight, one of our Michigan Climate Champion Award winners from last year, Andrea Pierce is the policy director at the Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition. She is the co-founder and chair of the Anishinaabek Caucus, a member of the advisory board of Ann Arbor for Public Power, one of our steering committee members, and a member of the Washtenaw Environmental Council, a member of the Little Traverse Bay Bands of Odawa Indians, and a lifelong activist for Indigenous rights. Andrea, please share with us some of the other cultural risks that we don't often maybe think about in this discussion.
Yeah, let me get my PowerPoint set. Give me just a second. Okay, here it is. So thank you, everybody. And I really want to thank you for inviting me to speak about the Line 5 tunnel and how it'll impact the Indigenous peoples that are living on these lands. I titled mine Another False Solution because it seems like we're coming up with, or they are coming up, the government's coming with a lot of false solutions that do not do our people and our lands and our brothers any good at all. I am Andrea Pierce, Wasnodekwe Indigenous, Wakanaktasingo Odawa Nandochapa, Wakwa Nadotum. So I am from Little Traverse Bay Band of Odawa Indians. I'm a tribal elder, and my clan is the Bear Clan. My pronouns are she, her, we, and us, because even though it says I did all of this, I had a lot of people working with me. We've always worked together. I totally believe that we are stronger together. One person can't do it all. That's why we have a whole group of us. One of the things I also did was the Pipe Out Paddle Up Flotilla. Jenny Ann Cornstalk and I came up with that years ago, and it's still going on. I believe this will be our 9th year when we have it. 2025. We were hoping it would have been over, but here we go again. And that was us. We wanted to make it stronger together. We invited people, Michigan citizens, tribal nations. We invited legislators, tribal legislators, environmental organizations, so that we can build these networks so that when something happens, good or bad, that we have our community to call on. So I pulled this off the Enbridge website, and this is probably what they're expecting it to look like. I chose this one because we're supposed to be a utility tunnel. So it's going to house electric and the pipeline. And as we know, the pipeline can carry just about anything they want because they don't really have to tell us. They say they do, and they will, but we've already noticed that through when we called them out, that we found out that it wasn't always what they said they were doing. So this is what it should look like. And if you think water and oil don't mix, try gas and electricity. I mean, it's just a prescription for disaster. And we have to also think about who else is going to be impacted by this. We have the fish, we have the animals, the birds, the flora, the fauna that live nearby there, that as indigenous nations, we rely on them. And we got the pipeline plover that's nearby. He could become extinct. He's already on the endangered list. And that's where he comes through, is through Straits of Mackinac. So here's our beautiful Lake Michigan. I do love looking at our beautiful lake. We do house 20% of the world's fresh water, and this is again at stake. We thought the pipeline under there, 73 years old, was horrible, and this seems to be just as bad, if not worse. Tribal treaties, culture, tradition, and our people are in jeopardy. We have Sault Ste. Marie tribe on the north side and Little Traverse Bay Band of Odawa Indians on the south side of the tunnel, pipeline, bridge. Now, remember, Governor Whitmer has revoked the easement of Line 5. She did that a few years ago, and it's still pumping oil illegally and against the law. And I think that's something that's really heinous. All through the elections, all through the last sessions, we have asked, implored, begged, pleaded former President Biden and Department of Transportation Pete Buttigieg to enforce the shutdown and stop this tunnel. And they ignored us. We got crickets. And I think that's just terrible that our elected officials, who are going to be running for something again, I'm pretty sure Pete Buttigieg has his eye on stuff to run for in Michigan. He should have been leading this charge. He should have been working to protect us at that level already. And they failed us. Now, I want to remind everybody that the MPSC, the Michigan Public Service Commission, are all Whitmer appointees, and they are the ones that permitted the Line 5 tunnel so that it is going to go. This will happen, evidently, because unless, of course, we're going to the Michigan Supreme Court. I don't know what's happening next. We just heard the news today about the Court of Appeals affirming the decision about the MPSC for the Line 5 tunnel. And I just want to remind everybody that we are not a resource. This is our beautiful sacred water. This is what we need. How much of our body is water? We need this. This is not a resource. This is a sacred being that should be protected and prayed for at all costs. So we're going to go over man camps because I keep bringing these up, and every time I do, people are shocked and not heard of them. So these are camps that come in with the usually with the pipeline corporations when they're doing big builds or stuff. Pipelines, I guess tunnels, anything that they're building. They bring in their workers and they house them in little camps, and this is where they live. They make huge amounts of money. They're not from these areas usually. They're usually from other states or Michigan or Canada, I mean. And that makes them dangerous to indigenous peoples, especially when on tribal lands where our laws are different in federal laws, and how that is implicated with when Native people are killed. Our killers are not always taken to jail. The Department of Justice doesn't pay attention to that. To us, we can make claims. Our families would try to make claims, and we are not heard, and we just disappear. And I think that is another horrible thing. And as having people up and around and all over the state of Michigan, I don't want man camps here. I really don't. And Enbridge has bought out a lot of land up north, so they're planning on a lot of man camps. And if you look at this, they get large, no roots, they get big, large paychecks. Their family is not there, and they have many lonely nights in an area with minority people around. And if they respected us or believed in what we have the right to exist, then we would not be disappearing. Which will bring us to missing and murdered indigenous people. It's at this point, it's like an epidemic in multiple states, most of them that have Native people in them. So here's some information I dug up off of our website, ours being the Michigan.gov, the Attorney General. This is 4 of 5 American Indians and Alaska Native women have experienced violence in their lifetime, and that of Indigenous women who have experienced violence. 56.1% have experienced sexual violence, and this may be without the man camps there. So Native people, especially our women, are really are targeted. One, because the laws don't protect us, and two, it just seems like people don't care if we're missing or not. And I have a real fear of losing my family. I have sisters, aunts, cousins. I have my brothers up north. I have friends. I have a lot of people up there. And the thought of man camps and taking and hurting my family in my community is really scary and disturbing. And I think that needs to be brought out more when we're talking about these big, huge bills, how they're impacting the people nearby. We're going to talk about overall more than 595,000 American Indian and Alaska Native men have experienced violence in the past year. That's a huge amount of numbers. We're only like 1% of the population. And this is how many are being hurt. So in response, in Michigan, Attorney General Dana Nessel, the 12 tribes of Michigan, and the Michigan State Police have worked together and established a tip line, in addition to other available resources. So when we come up missing, our family can call somebody and they'll hopefully come and work and try to find us before we're killed. And this is not performative. I talked to Dana, AG Nessel, and she says this is real. And this is most likely, in my opinion, due to the fact of man camps coming to our state. Because how long is it going to take to build that monstrosity that's going to end up destroying our land and water? So here's another point that I thought would be important, is that Lake Michigan has a sacred site. In 2020, during COVID, I was part of a team that discovered a 10,000-year-old sacred site at the bottom of Lake Michigan. That's the rocks on the bottom picture. They're in a big circle. They're huge. And we need to be able to have time to study this and learn our history from this wonderful sacred site, and not have it destroyed by the drilling and boring and explosions that is going to be happening day and night. We really need to take the time. This is the top picture are friends of mine. When I called and asked, I couldn't even tell them what we were working on. It was that secretive because we just wanted to see Line 5. And we ended up finding a sacred site. 10,000 years old. Tell me Creator wasn't looking out for us. And this will be impacted by the boring for that tunnel. There's no way it couldn't be. So the Washington Treaty of 1836, it reserves the Little Traverse Bay bands of Odawa Indians our right to hunt, fish, and gather within the ceded territories, which is where Line 5 runs through. And Line 5 is adjacent to our tribal trust lands, LTBB reservation boundaries. Any rupture or break would be detrimental to the water and ecosystems that supports the plants and animals that the tribal citizens rely on. In case it will impact our treaty rights, we have the right to hunt, fish, and gather. This way we can teach our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren and have these traditions carry on as part of our culture, as part of our history, to be able to hunt and fish and gather. I remember going out with my grandma doing berrying in the summertime. I remember going fishing with my uncles. They'd take me out in different spots and taught me how to, I can't tell the spots, but they did. They took me out there. That was how I learned. That's how I learned how important this is, was from my family teaching me. And if that's gone, we can't teach our children. And this fish is important to us. We're we're the woodland tribes. So we have to protect the forests, the lakes, the rivers, the streams. We have to. And let's see the next one. So Native Citizenship Act is under attack. I don't know if you guys have been reading the papers, but right now it's stayed temporarily. They got what was it, 214 weeks left to try to erode this. And this is what's under attack. Tribal nations. We were the last group of people to gain citizenship in the United States on our own lands. Everybody else who came here got it before us. You have to ask yourself why. So those treaty rights, those land rights, because of those, we are the frontline warriors because we have installed a lot of digging, a lot of pipelines. We have been frontline warriors in these fights. And that needs to be remembered. And we need help. We can't just leave it to the Indians. We're 1% of the population. We need help. But we also need to be Native citizens. Because you have to wonder, why are they after this other than the land rights and the treaty rights? What are they trying to do? And who's going to do the boring? Who's going to dig? Well, we all know that there is now an executive order about the energy emergency that's going on, and they're pushing lines like through all these pipeline permitting. Why? Did you ask why? Well, I researched and found out that Elon Musk has a pipeline company, the Boring Company.com. Seriously. And they dig up and build utility tunnels. Is that why all of a sudden this has come up to the top of the list and people want this and now it's even harder or easier to get the permits and they're going through without making any sense or following any of the rules or regulations and policies and procedures while they're being top line? Because who stands to gain? It's not Michigan. So we've always been told that it's either this or it's that. We have to have a tunnel or we have to have the pipeline. We have to have it. And the pipeline is dangerous because it's 73 years old. So we're going to put this tunnel in instead. No, we don't have an either or. That is simply not our case. Michigan does not benefit from this pipeline. We already know that we're using like 5% and that's it. It goes down to Detroit for the marathon, and then it goes to Sarnia, and they export it to China. And I heard to make plastic. I still bet money on it that those empty Walmart big freighters that leave here empty, coming back with Enbridge product on there, those little gadgets and doomer flunkers. So we don't benefit from this. Who benefits? Canada and Enbridge benefit. So why are we taking these risks? Why? If nothing else, the Kalamazoo oil spill has taught us how an oil spill in the Great Lakes will work or not work. If you still can't go to Kalamazoo and walk around and do anything nearby. There's still oil there. How many years later? What is it, like close to 20 now? Or 10? Sometimes it's a long. Yeah, I think it's closer to 10. I misspoke there. But we all know that did not benefit Michigan. Enbridge got a slap on the wrist and they went ahead and put their fences up and kicked us all away from trying to help and contain the spill as they kept pumping it out for 17 hours. So the solution to this is enforce the shutdown of Line 5 that Governor Whitmer already has in place, remove any and all permits for the farce of a tunnel. This will be a stranded asset. And again, will not benefit Michigan. We'll be stuck holding a $1 billion bag of crap that we didn't need, want, and it's going to hurt our water. Now, labor has been wanting this. I've said labor is desperately needed for this job. Who else can we trust but to take apart that tunnel or that pipeline, Line 5 pipeline? Who will take that out of there safely but our own labor unions? And I think that's how this should work out. I think that we need to work on our next plan of action, keep an eye out, because this isn't finished. I'm hoping that we will take this all the way to the Supreme Court, because this is not good for Michigan. You've already heard from our last speaker how disgustingly this put together this will be and our impacts. And now you know how it's going to impact us, the indigenous people and our lands and the animals who don't have a choice. You think they want to swim around in methane with all of that back drilling being put into their water? No, they don't. They just want to live. So if anybody has questions.
Thanks so much, Andrea. I think if folks want to throw questions in the chat, we'll see if we might just have a little bit of time after this. Incredibly sobering. I'm so glad you came to make the voice of the lake and Tree Nation and Bird Nation and those perspectives from the Indigenous communities that absolutely have not had a voice in any of this. And as Enbridge likes to say, you know, wow, treaties were signed and that means forever, right? And it's just really an insult to the idea that Indigenous communities have given those rights away and would never have any opportunity to speak up for themselves again. And we're glad to be able to speak on that behalf in some limited capacity. Well, we do have just a few actions that we can share with everyone tonight. Our speakers, I think, have made it really clear that Enbridge's plan to build this new oil tunnel pipeline across the Straits of Mackinac is going to put the Great Lakes at tremendous risk. Not just the environmental and cultural disaster. I see folks talking about, we didn't even cover the economic risks today. Andrew got a little bit into that and the what Michigan taxpayers will really be on the hook for. So all of these risks and our role in MICAN, again, continue to amplify the climate impacts, going to cause enormous greenhouse gas pollution at a time, and this project is contrary to Michigan's own environmental values and legal protections. We passed the 2023 Clean Energy and Jobs Act with a goal of 100% clean energy by 2040. And if we want a shot at achieving that goal at all, we simply cannot invest in any new fossil fuel infrastructure. The tunnel, again, is one of the most unfortunate examples of a false solution. It harms communities, exacerbates the climate crisis, all while undermining Michigan's clean energy goals. With this new administration in DC prioritizing big oil, Michigan faces renewed challenges in 2025 to protect the natural resource. And we are asking for our policymakers and decision makers here and the agencies to stand up. There are still a few chances left. As I started and opened at the top of the hour here, unfortunately, I learned just before starting this event that our appeal challenging the Michigan Public Service Commission's disastrous decision to exclude the very arguments that you heard today about the risk and the need for Line 5 at all, much less the economic and other pieces, that those are not going to be remanded to the agency. As Andrea said, they're part of that appeal as well. I'm not sure what the next steps are, whether we will appeal to the Supreme Court, but I would still ask you to sign on to support our appeal, because we've had over 1,000 folks sign this and over 40 organizations, and we will be taking this to those decision makers to continue to showcase the broad public support for moving away from fossil fuels and not building this tunnel and shutting down the dual pipelines as they are. So please take that action. I think Amanda is helping me out and throwing some links in the chat there for me as I keep going here. The second action that you can take, and I saw a question in the chat about this. Well, what is Eagle? Why isn't Eagle doing what it should be doing? Well, let's make them do what they need to do as well. There's a clean water permit that is up from Eagle. It was already approved once. There's some questions around whether this is a renewal, whether this is reauthorization, but there's another opportunity here to advocate to our friends at Eagle to make sure that they deny the water permit. And I think Amanda will put that link in the chat. That's sponsored by our friends, and we're part of the steering committee at Oil and Water Don't Mix. An opportunity here to make our voices heard and let decision makers again know that we do not want this thing. We do not need this thing, and it is only going to exacerbate our risks and our crises. The last action that I have for you, again, this is also new news. As of this week, advocates learned that the Line 5 tunnel project is on a list of projects that is requesting the Army Corps of Engineers to expedite or fast track that approval and not do the full environmental review that is necessary and that the Army Corps of Engineers has already started and is already trying to proceed with. Again, all the risks that you heard about tonight are the exact things that we think should be fully considered. And it is unfathomable to us that when those risks are truly considered, that these projects would go forward. Right now, we think that this Army Corps decision will be made like tomorrow, folks. So please get on there. If you are listening to this right now, please get on there and take this action to tell the Army Corps of Engineers to not expedite this project. We have to at least explore these risks and let citizens' voices be heard. I want to thank everybody for really being a part of tonight. And even though we started with some devastating news and this fight again continues, I really do think that the more of us know about these risks and are able to share them as advocates to decision makers and in our communities, that we now hold this information. If nobody else is going to listen to it, we have to continue to make sure that it is out there. And I appreciate you being part of this event. If you're not already part of MyCam, please join us. We do have just a couple minutes if there are any other maybe big questions in there that we could try to take on. I'll stop sharing for just a second as we close things out. Anything in there that we can answer right now? And thanks to Ashley rising up some of the economic impacts. Again, we could do a whole other webinar just on the economic impacts, and we'll share out a great event by Groundwork last spring on tunnel vision that included some of those pieces as well. Anything we can answer?
We had a couple questions in the chat, but I'm not sure that they'll be easy for anybody to answer. So let me see. I marked down the time. So the first one was by Rick asked if we thought, and I don't know exactly who he was asking, maybe Brian, do you think the whole tunnel proposal is just a stalling tactic to allow them to keep pumping oil while the tunnel is being built and maybe never even finishing the tunnel? And I'm not sure anybody has a direct answer to that question.
Well, this is Brian. I've heard that, and it certainly appears to be that way. Enbridge is continuing to make money from pushing the oil and gas through the pipeline. They are making an attempt to do the right thing with respect to doing some studies and having engineers and whatnot involved. But I don't know what their motives are. All I can tell you is based on what they've found to date, they haven't addressed all the concerns that were raised, and they seem to be just going through the motions. So it's hard to determine if they're serious. I'm not sure again, but I can tell you that they haven't done enough and they haven't done the right things, and that's what concerns me. So I'm taking it seriously that they're going to pursue this and intend to do it, and that's why I'm concerned, because everything that I'm seeing shows me that they either don't understand the risks or they are ignoring them or just ignorant to them. So it's worrisome to me.
Yeah.
Can I,
Sure,
can
go
I
ahead.
answer too?
Sure.
I believe that this is a real threat to Michigan and that this needs to be taken as such. They have said that they want to build this. They're going through. They keep funding the court cases. They keep funding everything that to get it, right? And now we're on an emergency or energy emergency EO list. I don't think that we can take this anything but to the highest level of being that it's going to happen if we don't stop it. If we don't keep fighting, if we don't keep writing and calling everybody that we can, this will be our future.
Couldn't have picked better closing words myself. I see the questions in there. You know, the Michigan Court of Appeals issued what's called a per curiam opinion, which usually is then just an order that says we decline to remand and do this. But they also decided to write 30 pages about it, and there, I think the legal review, since that just happened today, I think that we really need to take a little time and read through all of that, and we'll be making a decision whether we go to the Michigan Supreme Court with that or not. And I have to say, I am really buoyed by your comments in the chat and the urgency that you all feel and the continued united front to fight, to fight and fight back. And what that might look like direct action this year. It might look like more protests. It might look a little different, folks. We are in, as you all know, really uncharted waters here as we move forward and try to continue to stop this disastrous spill and effects on Michigan. I appreciate everyone coming out tonight. I know it's been a little sobering, and we will be in touch with the next steps that each of you can take in our communities and continue to connect and support all of you in, frankly, the fight of our lives. I hope to connect with all of you soon and have the best evening you possibly can.